Alrighty, we're working on a study guide as opportunity cost. It doesn't matter if you're in the government or if you're an individual, okay, or if you're leading a business or if you're a customer, right? Everybody has opportunity costs, and no matter what you do, everything will have opportunity costs. We have this idea in the economy of being able to be guided towards productive activities, and that is profit and loss, right? You want to be doing things that are profitable. That means you're taking resources and turning them into something that are more useful, or you can be making a loss, and that means you're taking resources and turning them into something that's less useful, and that means that those resources, they could be used better elsewhere, right? So don't use them on whatever you're doing at a loss. Instead, see if there's another way you can use them, or if not, stop using those resources so somebody else can use those resources, right? Moving on, we have this concept of the invisible hand, right? Where everyone working out of their own self-interest will still lead to the best possible allocation of our resources and allow us to have more prosperity, right? How we don't need to necessarily have things planned from the top down. People, make planning for their own lives from the bottom up is also a way to organize an economy. You may want to be familiar, or you will want to be familiar, I should say, with the laws of I don't know why this is so hard. Maybe it's just because it's too early in the morning. The laws of supply and demand. Okay? And then knowing that, what can change supply and demand? Right? So the law of supply indicates that as prices go up, people will want to supply more of an item, and as prices go down, people will want to supply less. The law of demand states that as prices go up, people will want to buy less, and as prices go down, people will want to buy more. However, when we graph supply and demand, or if we ever just, think as, kind of a thought experiment, what would happen to demand if the price of gas went up? What would happen to the demand for cars that use a lot of gas? Well, if gas is a higher price, people aren't going to want the cars that use a lot of gas as much. So the demand for those would decrease, right? Or if gas got cheaper, people may want to purchase those cars more. It could be that electric cars become, really popular, and you're really cool if you drive a Tesla. So that increases the demand for electric cars, okay? For supply is all about cost when it comes to the supply curve. So if something costs more to make, that's going to decrease the supply, right? There's going to be less of it available. You're going to see higher prices because of that. And if something is easier to make, cheaper to make, it's going to increase the supply, leading to lower prices, all right? So we talked in class about competition. What does competition lead to? That is lower prices, that's better products, right? Companies then have to care what the consumer wants, otherwise the consumers are going to go somewhere else. And when it comes to economic growth, what do we need? We need private property rights. Right, private property rights are important because they give individuals an incentive to take care of what they have. They give individuals an incentive to use what they have for other individuals. Right? If I want to be able to get more for myself, I have to be able to use what I own myself for you to help you. Okay? So protecting private property rights, free trade, right? Enabling people to trade with who they want, because the more trades we have, the more mutually beneficial exchanges we have. Of course, a stable money supply. Or that you may hear this as a stable monetary policy, right? We don't want hyperinflation, anything like that. And of course, going back to private property, what's the difference between something that's privately owned and publicly owned? Well, if it's privately owned, people have an incentive to take care of it. If it's publicly owned, no one owns it. No one has an incentive to take care of it. So oftentimes you'll see that the publicly owned areas, that will be, I suppose, more, or I guess less cared for and not as well maintained Okay. And then I want to go back up to competition, right? Because we think typically of competition among firms, but competitions for firms, there are also buyers, right? If I'm a store and I'm hiring somebody, I have to hire them something that they want to be paid, right? If I pay them not enough, what's going to happen? They're going to go somewhere else and get paid the amount that they think they're worth, right? Or I think I'm $1 million bucks, I'm going to go somewhere and work. Whoever's going to give me the highest for my wages, right? So when we look at this idea of competition, right? No one's required to work for somebody, yeah. So it has to attract individuals by paying them an amount that is higher than what they could earn elsewhere, right? So what is money, right? Money is a medium of exchange. Money is a store of value, right? Medium of exchange is very important because this is what gives money value, right? Because it enables us to trade goods indirectly. This increases how much we can trade. This decreases our, and if it's increasing how much we can trade, we can assume that it's making it cheaper to trade, right? I don't have to go find somebody that, if I have chickens and I want grain, I don't have to go find somebody who wants chickens. I can sell the chickens, get some money, and then I can buy the grain, right? So it increases the number of trades we can have. We have way more trade than we would. It reduces our transaction costs. So we have money that is a medium of exchange, a unit of a store of value, and a unit of account, right? Money is something that we can put a label on things and be able to compare values. We talked about this here, the stable money supply. Why is that important? Well, it comes down to being able to feel safe about the future, right? Because if my money is losing value rapidly, do I want to invest in that area? Do I want to build a shop in that area if any of the money that I earn is going to rapidly lose value, right? If I spend, $1 million investing in an area, and then, I try to earn revenue from that business, and that business is not able to earn revenue and pay the bills because hyperinflation is happening. Where there is inflation, there's not going to be investment, right? It becomes harder to get money back on your investment. Let's see. There's one more thing we should add to what causes growth, and that is limited regulation, okay? Because if we have too much regulation, what ends up happening is that the companies that are already in will typically be the ones writing that legislation. So it'll make it very, very hard for new companies to come in and compete against them. That reduces competition. You also see that these regulations will often have unintended secondary effects that will lead to future problems, right? So then we just need more laws to fix the laws that we already have in place, right? And that can get very silly very quickly. Okay. And of course, I'm going to go ahead and tab these all over. Right, economic growth. This is directly linked with economic freedom, right? The more economic freedom you have, the more economic growth you have. And these are the things that lead to economic freedom, right? Largely free trade, right? Private property, and the stable monetary policy. And if we look at trade restrictions, why is it that politicians can often benefit from trade restrictions? Well, that is because of the power of the special interest, right? We call this a special interest effect, where there is a large group that cares deeply about an issue, and because of that, they're able to influence politicians' behavior, because the people that are not caring about it, they don't do anything. So while costs may be imposed on everyone, it's such a small cost that they don't do anything about it. Whereas the benefits to the interest group, the select few, is very, very large. So they can mobilize voters easily. They can donate to politicians' campaigns, and the special interests will end up being the ones that get legislation made because they're the ones putting congressmen and congresswomen in office. Yeah. Let's see here. What else should we know for the test? course, free trade, this is important because trade creates wealth for both parties. Okay, another thing we have to realize is that it allows specialization. And specialization is important because it allows us to create more than we ever could on our own. Which then means getting goods cheaper, right, than we could on our own. And that's important. Even if we're getting something cheaper and we don't have to make something here in the United States anymore, that's good because that allows us to make something else that we can specialize in and trade whatever we're making for goods and services. We have to remember that the cost of government is not just taxes. There's also this idea that taxes, they drive a wedge in between what you pay and what you get. And this creates what we call a deadweight loss. And a deadweight loss is a wedge between what I pay as a customer and what the seller of an item will get, right? If it were like, because I have to pay tax, right? If the price of the item was cheaper, then I would be willing to buy more, or I'd be willing to buy other items, but because the tax exists, I am not willing to buy as much, right? So there is this deadweight loss. I'm assuming you want to put it together. There we go. And one of the ways that we can measure the regulation is the size of the government. And we do this with the GDP to government spending. Or I should say government spending to GDP. Right? What percentage of the GDP is government spending, right? Is it 25%? Is it closer to 50? Is it over 50? Right? That'll tell us how big the government is and therefore the size of the government. Yeah? Because typically if you're going to have more regulation, you're going to have a bigger government. Okay. We have this idea of the protective function, where the government is protecting your private property rights. Okay. We also have the government's productive function. This is where it's providing things that are provided by the public dollars, by the government. Okay. So this could be public goods. Okay. This could be private goods. The government provides all sorts of goods and services. Yeah. But both of these are needed, right? While economists do debate about what type of goods it should provide as far as private goods, if it should provide any at all, or if it should provide few because they have some positive externalities, all economists can say that, or at least most economists can say that certainly it should provide public goods, right? Like protection of private property rights, like national defense, right? Like dams and so on. So this productive function is something the government needs to do. Okay. When we say, economically efficient, I should go back up here and just say, this is economic efficiency. Right? When the costs are greater than the benefits, that is not how you spell efficiency. Thank you, autocorrect. Bothers me that it has the lines on it. Sorry. So costs are greater than benefits, right? I guess I'll put that up here too. Greater than benefits. That's economic efficiency, right? And this applies to government as well, correct? That applies to government as well, not just individuals, not just companies, but also if the government's providing a program, the cost should outweigh the benefits. Otherwise, it should not be undertaken because it means those resources could be used better elsewhere. We have this idea of externalities. And, this gets really awkward when we have external costs instead of external benefits. That means that normally trade creates wealth, right? I'm better off, another person's better off. However, there's a third person impacted by our trade that is worse off, right? If I'm selling cigarettes to somebody, and they start smoking as they're walking down the street, whoever's walking by them is going to have a cost imposed on them. Yeah. So the true cost of those cigarettes was not paid because there's another cost being imposed on somebody, that is breathing in the smoke that they didn't pay for. Right. So that cost is being imposed on somebody else. Yeah. And a big part of this is unwillingly. Yeah, unwillingly. Okay. Let's see. Oh, and we should say as well that the supply curve will understate the true cost of this item, right? Because the supply curve won't be high enough. Yeah, the supply curve will have the supply. The supply curve will have the cost of the item being at equilibrium. However, since it's costlier in reality, because it's costlier, that would actually move the supply curve to the left, right? It would decrease. We should supply less because the cost is actually higher, right? So the supply curve understates it. Anyways, one thing they talk about in the book is that these externalities, they usually result from poorly defined property rights, right? It comes from people, one person, not realizing, oh my goodness, like I'm invading this person's, space around them and smoking around them and not respecting their body or, their private property by smoking around them, right? If I have, some runoff going from my property onto someone else's property, I'm not respecting their private property, right? Because I'm enabling, paint or whatever to go into their property, right? So my negative externality of me buying paint from the paint store and painting, my house and having some runoff into theirs, it's because I wasn't respecting, their private property rights. Okay, and if we look at things like, negative externalities like a factory polluting into the air, it's hard to define who has the air, and we know that cost is being imposed on everybody, but us not, defining who owns the air is causing there to be a company that can just put it up there because, well, they can impose that cost on everybody because nobody owns it, yeah? Okay. So we talked about competition. What happens if there's a monopoly? Is there competition? Well, no, it's because there's only one firm. So we talked about competition leading to lower prices and better products. Is that really going to happen when monopolies are present? Probably not. Probably not. We talked about this idea of the productive function and public goods. Just put it here again. Okay. Why are public goods hard for them to? Why are public goods provided by the governments? Because they're hard for markets to provide. Because it's hard to set up. Okay, you're getting the good and service, so you're going to pay for it. You can't do that with a public good because it's non-excludable and it's non-rivalrous. If I provide it for just one person, I'm providing it for everybody because everybody can use it. Yeah. So public goods are very, very hard for markets to provide because it's difficult to link up. Hey, you're using this, so you're going to pay for it. So entrepreneurs, they can't really be able to recoup the money from investing in this public good in the same way that I can get my money when I make bagels or something, because I can force people, not force, but if people buy them, the only reason I'm going to give them a bagel is if they give me money. Yeah. Maybe this coffee will help me talk clearly. Man, I feel like I've been stumbling through this. I apologize. So, and of course, we talk about, it's because of markets failing that they provide public goods, but we also know that there's government failure as well. Okay, there's failure in the public sector. There's also failure in the markets. Let's go back up here. We forgot to add something that's very, very central or necessary to understand in order to understand economics, and that's incentives matter, right? Everyone does things based on the incentives that matter to them, and this is to everybody, correct? This affects everyone. Okay, incentives matter to everybody. All right. We've also talked this section about rational ignorance. All right, we're going to see a lot of this on Tuesday. I'm doing this the day before our test, which is also election day. There are going to be a lot of people voting that aren't necessarily informed on every issue, right? Because the cost of becoming informed is much, much greater than the benefit of becoming informed, right? So they have this rational ignorance where they will be going to the polling place, in ignorance and voting on issues that they don't necessarily know about, or voting for politicians that are going to be enacting policy on issues that they don't necessarily know too much about. There may be people that will end up, voting and making decisions that they'll end up be okay with, and there may be individuals that go vote and then they realize that a person was put in office that they're not necessarily a fan of. But in any case, it is rational that voters aren't necessarily informed, because if you look at the incentives, it just doesn't really make sense to become informed for a lot of individuals. There's a lack of incentive to become well-informed. When it comes to politicians, there's this short-sightedness effect where they tend to focus on the current rather than the future. Because if you look, when we look at their incentive structure, we really just see that they're doing what they can to get reelected. They have a strong incentive to do things that have immediate results and have costs in the future, because the costs will be in the future while they are no longer in office. We talked about this idea between debts versus deficit. This idea between debt versus deficit. Deficit is how much we're in the hole for a given time period. We measure our deficit yearly. Debt is all of the money that we owe, right? All the previous year's deficits and surpluses, right? Years that we ran, with money extra. That doesn't happen very often. But deficit, again, is how much for the year, right? Debt is the accumulation of all of our past deficits. So, again, all deficits and surpluses, just the debts for this year, right? Debt, all the debts and surpluses added up. Deficit, all the debt for this year. Okay. So the more we start using income transfers, right, subsidies, tax credits, if the government's showing favoritism to a select group of people or businesses, this is more and more going to increase how much people are going to want to lobby or spend resources to try to get those subsidies and transfers for themselves. People will donate more to political campaigns. Politicians may have more of an incentive to do things in a not even-handed manner to show favoritism to one group or another. I suppose I should spell transfers correctly, huh? Anyways. And if we look at, that quote, there was that quote by Tytler that essentially said, when democracies are left unrestrained, it will inevitably lead to there being, government deficits, right? So what things do unrestrained democracy lead to? It's going to be deficit spending, right? Because politicians are affected by the short-sightedness effect. It's going to be interest groups taking, from taxpayers to the select few that have a very strong incentive to do so, right? Interest groups. And, we go back up here to rational ignorance. It just doesn't make sense for voters to become informed. So we'll have voters that are uninformed on many issues. Okay. So we then at the end of this chapter we started talking about central planning, and the truth is they just do not have the information. There's no way that they could possibly be able to provide all the information from each individual, as opposed to prices, which are both a signal to individuals on how they should act in regards to an item and the price of it. But it's the price of an item is also dictated by individuals' incentives and the decisions that they've made that automatically change the price, right? So central planners, they just don't have the ability to predict the demand, what the supply should be of an item. They don't have the ability or the incentive to innovate as much as individuals on markets do. Okay. Yeah. Anything else I want to say about central planners? Right, they just don't have the information. The world's changing too quickly around them. Another thing is that they don't have necessarily the best incentive structure, right? They're spending money that's not theirs oftentimes. So if you look at their incentive to spend it wisely, it's not going to be as strong as someone investing or spending their money in the private sector, right? In markets. And instead of allocating based on what's productive, they may allocate based on what's helping their political buddies. In any case, let's go ahead and go on. We talked about this idea when we were talking about transfers, right? But when it comes to taxes and subsidies, right? If you tax something, if you make it more expensive, you get less of it, correct? Right? If we tax, if we tax candy, the government may be doing it because they want people to eat less candy, right? People are going to buy less candy. If we subsidize something, if we give you money for doing something, you'll do more of it, right? So we looked at this with taxes for when we have an income tax, it decreases the incentive to work. We looked at subsidies for things like income transfers, either to individuals or to companies with things like farm subsidies. If we subsidize something, we get more of it, right? We get more of that thing being produced. Okay. And we also look at the secondary effects of policies, right? One of these things we looked at in the book was unemployment benefits, right? When people are receiving benefits or money for being unemployed, we should not be surprised if they spend a longer amount of time being unemployed because it decreases their incentive to find a job. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Oh, remember the 2008 financial crisis and what led up to it. Okay, this is essentially because the government told Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which was a government-backed bank, which meant that they were able to gain a large portion of the market. And that they told Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that they had to have a majority of their loans be from low and middle income borrowers. This led to them borrowing or buying loans from individuals who were loaning to not just low and middle income borrowers, but because those individuals had ran out of low and middle income people to borrow to, they could pay off a loan. They started loaning people that could not pay off a loan. So this increased the lending to people that were borrowing with what we call subprime credit, meaning they weren't necessarily good or prime borrowers, meaning that they could end up defaulting. And as as the decade of 2008 got started, we really saw a increase in the default rate, right around 2005, 2006, which resulted in the financial crisis of 2008. When we look at the war on poverty and the results of the war on poverty, we had all these programs that were created in the 60s, and ever since then, there hasn't really been any progress, right? And we looked at some other solutions in class to poverty because we know that these programs that are meant to help poverty do not help, right? There's been very little change. We also talked about during this section about competition, not just among firms, but competition among governments, right? It's important that governments also have competition because then governments will have to pass laws that the people want. The government will have to protect all individuals. The government will have to make sure that they're providing the public goods at a price that is attractive to their customers. In this case, which is the citizens. Yeah. And if there isn't competition, the governments don't have to care about providing lower prices, right? They can have taxes as high as they want to. The governments don't have to care about making sure that they're treating everybody equally. The governments don't have to care if they're not providing a good or service that the taxpayers want. Yes. So when government is decentralized, there is competition. However, when there's one big government for one whole area, there's not as much competition because you can't go anywhere in order to be existing under a different government. Yeah. So it's important that government is decentralized because it will lead to competition. Okay. All right. Which reminds me, this is one thing that will lead to, there being wiser spending and the government providing programs people want. But it's also that, when it comes to economic efficiency, we have to have the incentives brought into where politicians want to have efficiency, right? Where they don't want to deficit spend, right? We have to have the self-interest of people that are voting, right? Even though they may be ill-informed of politicians, people working for the government, they have to be brought into harmony with this efficient use of our resources. Yes. Otherwise, we'll end up having not just market failure, but also government failure. Okay. The book talked about some solutions to the whole government deficit problem. And this is, right, the 3/4 majority. Yeah. Which would decrease the spending. I'll just go ahead and put it up here. The 3/4 majority for spending in Congress, right? And the idea is that this would be harder to attain, and so therefore spending would not happen as much. All right, guys, thank you for watching. We will have our test. If you're watching this video online, it's happening tomorrow. So have a good one, and I'll see you. Let me know if you have any questions. Bye.